to Shattering Myths. I am your host, Yahowah. As we turn the page and consider Yahowah's testimony, I want to share one transition thought with you. When the U.S. government says that we're going to disregard a central pillar of the U.S. Constitution and we're going to adapt to the new circumstance, and therefore freedom, which requires privacy. We're going to invade that privacy to secure your freedom in wholesale disregard for the Constitution that we have sworn to uphold. It means that they have proven themselves to be unreliable, untrustworthy. So why does anyone trust them when they say that they have this new plan, but this new plan is good for them, when they have shown that they weren't trustworthy to uphold the plan that they had sworn to honor? It is why it is impossible for there to be a New Testament. For God to have said that old plan no longer works, I am not going to honor my original plan, that everything I said regarding my original plan I am hereby rescinding, but I have a new plan. Well, if you couldn't trust him with his previous plan, why would you trust him with the new one? Well, that's the reason there is no New Testament. The original plan, God has said that he is going to honor forever. Unlike governments, which God said you ought to walk away from, you ought to distance yourself from, if you want to engage in a relationship with him. Now, we were talking about the Shabbat and Yah's statement in Devarim regarding the Shabbat. And what we learned is that there are 7 essential insights ensconced in the concept of Shabbat that are worth our consideration. The primary spiritual message is that we cannot work for our salvation. Unlike the gentleman sitting beside me on my flight home from my son's wedding, who thought that the good works that were being done by those of the Christian faith was justification for their salvation, God said, no, ain't nothing you're going to do that's going to impress me, unless what you're doing is to examine and consider and respond to my teaching, my guidance. Yeah, I'll respect that. But if your goal is to impress me with your good deeds, forget it. Yahowah alone provides the way and the means to the relationship and to reconciliation. If we want to be with him, we must rest and rely on him to nuach, to settle us safely in his home, completely settling all issues related to our adoption into his family. The second insight is that we are asked to kodesh, set apart time on the Shabbat for Yahowah, prioritizing our relationship with God, getting to know him better. The Shabbat is designed to yada Yahowah. It is a special time to reflect on our relationship. This is what it means to Shabbat, observe the Shabbat. You know, Shabbat is not only a noun, it's also a verb. Shabbat is actionable. And when it's presented as a verb, it means to observe the Shabbat. That's God's instruction. To observe means to closely examine and carefully consider. Third, the Shabbat is a time to celebrate Yahowah's Shavah promises. He has sworn an oath and he has made a solemn vow to adopt us into his family, to perfect us, to make us immortal, to enrich us, to empower us, allowing us to live with him in his home, if we only listen to our Heavenly Father and accept his advice. In this light, Sheba is the satisfactory fulfillment of an oath or promise. The moment we cease to see Shabbat in the concept of promise and God's promise to us being dependable, being reliable, being trustworthy, and that his promise is the covenant and its benefits, the moment we stop seeing Shabbat relative to God's promise to us, we cease to understand its purpose. Fourth, the Shabbat is defined by Shama, listening, and Shamar, closely observing Yahowah and His Word. The better we hear, the more diligently we examine, the closer to God we become. To know God, we have to listen to Him. We have to observe what He has written on our behalf so that we come to know Him. And to engage in a relationship with Him, we have to do these same things. Shema, listen. Shamar, observe, so that we come to know and understand what He is offering, because it is only in that way that we can trust and rely upon this marvelous solution that He has provided. Fifth, man, who is represented by the number 6, created on the 6th day, a carbon-based life form whose molecular weight is 6, in addition to God, who is 1, equates to Sheba, 7, which describes Shaba, being completely satisfied and fulfilled, lacking nothing. Look what you can learn from the Word. It's not only promise, it's a promise based upon Sheba, 7, and Shaba, being completely satisfied and fulfilled, lacking nothing. This not only depicts Yahowah's plan of salvation, of 6 plus 1 as He has presented it in this context, of man plus God equaling the relationship that He desires. It describes the result. Creation, like salvation, is an equation. Yahowah's redemptive plan is based upon the pattern of 6 plus 1 that is described in the 7 Moed Mikre, in the 7 days of creation, in the 7 days of the week. It begins with a sacrifice on Pesach, providing the doorway to life, and ends with the celebration of our relationship during the 7 days of tabernacles, sukkah, shelters, of camping out with God. The 6th lesson embedded in the Shabbat is prophetic. All human history, as well as Yahowah's plan of salvation, unfolds based upon the pattern of 6 plus 1. It is the key which unlocks God's timeline. Adam's choice to separate from God, which really began the process of this equation, it occurred in 3968 BCE, year 1 on Yahowah's calendar. By the way, it would be 4000 BCE if it wasn't for the Christian church being so preoccupied with errant minutiae. Year 0 was created by the Roman Catholic Church based upon what they thought was the year of Yahushua's birth. But by the way, they didn't even create a year 0. They weren't smart enough to do that. Now the Hindus in India figured out the concept of the 0. They made that year 1, as if there was no year 0. And they decided that they liked their God as a baby because that baby was dependent on their mother, and they made their mother part of their religion. And they liked their God nailed to a crucifix because He was easy to control in those 2 modes. They even liked the idea that man could kill their God. So their God was born and their God died, just like ordinary humans. And so they picked year 1 as the birthday for their God. Well, God's 4th millennia, the date that was established during the creation account in the Torah, where the greater light would become a sign for the meetings, the Moed. When that year is equated to our pagan timepieces, is 33 CE. And so to go back 4,000 years from 33 CE, you end up at 3968 BCE because, of course, there is no year 0. It was in 33 CE in our pagan calendars, year 4000 Yah, that Yahushua fulfilled the first 4 Moed Mikre, enabling all of the promises associated with the covenant through Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shabuah, with the 4th Mikre being named 7 Sabbaths underscoring the importance of 7. So that was 3968 BCE. Noah's flood took place 1,000 years later in 2968 BCE when we finish this review of 7 and Shabbat. We're going to turn to the story of the flood, the scientific explanation for it, and a detailed presentation of what Yahowah actually said. I'm sure you're going to find fascinating. I know I did. Then, that was, by the way, at the year 1000 Yah, 2968 BCE, 1,000 years from being expelled from the garden. Abraham's reliance on Yahowah, his willingness to listen to and trust God, facilitated the ratification of the covenant on Mount Moriah in 1968 BCE. That was year 2000 Yah. Yahweh's tabernacle was constructed by Solomon in 968 BCE, year 3000 Yah. Exactly 1,000 years later, in 40 Yobel from the covenant's commencement, Yahusha enabled the covenant's promises on Mount Moriah, fulfilling the Moed Mikre of Pesach, Passover, matzah, unyeasted bread, Bokodim, first fruits, firstborn child. On the Yobel of 33 CE, year 4000 Yah, and of course 7 sevens later on Shavuah, the set-apart spirit empowered and enriched the beneficiaries of those first 3 steps to God. Then in 1033, 1,000 years later, in the Yobel year of 5,000 Yah, Moriah's spring was poisoned, consistent with the Torah's test for infidelity, saying the Roman Catholic Church and Judaism and all the religions that grew out of this place, including by this time the Muslim shrines and mosques built on it, were judged by God to be divorced, separated from him, wholly estranged, dead, poisoned. And 7th, there are multiple literal, spiritual, and prophetic teachings embedded in most everything Yahowah communicates. The word comes alive when we search for the insights that can be learned in those things associated with 7, including the fact in just 20 years, it will be 2033. That is the year that Yahowah, through Yahusha, will fulfill the Day of Reconciliations and Sukkah, starting year 7,000 Yah. We'll return in a moment. To Shattering Myths. We have Glenn calling in from Philadelphia. I suspect here that Glenn's going to ask one of those questions that I am most uncomfortable answering, but we definitely want to encourage callers. So, Glenn, please go ahead.
It would be a lot easier for me if you would just write a systematic theology, so I don't have to pose all the questions to you one at a time.
Okay. Well, Yahowah wrote a systematic approach to him, but even he didn't summarize it for us. He provided it to us in such a way that the only way that we can really benefit from it is to closely examine it, carefully consider it, and use the Nesama conscience, which is the seat of good judgment, to be able to appreciate it and respond to it. So since he didn't summarize things and say, hey, Glenn, this is specifically the answer to your personal question, chances are I'm not going to be able to do it either. But let's try.
All right. Well, actually, if you don't mind a little poke in the ribs, if you want me to make you uncomfortable,
sure.
I'll hit you with this just first of all.
Okay.
I think I found your shibboleth.
My what?
Your shibboleth. You know the story of the shibboleth, the word that the enemies couldn't pronounce in their testament.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
okay, sure.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Okay. There's no U after the letter C in the word nuclear, but that's
okay. Okay. Well, that's if that's the word I do, I'm fine with that. One of the things that I have always been fairly willing to admit publicly is that there were two reasons that I was uncomfortable moving from a written review of Yahowah's testimony to a spoken presentation on the various radio programs that I've done over the last 7 or 8 years. Maybe three reasons. One is that the spoken word, when I find that I have made a mistake, I can go back and fairly easily edit them, although it takes a lot of time, and I'm constantly editing them. It's very, very difficult to go back and edit verbal communication. If you were to try to, you would consume your entire life. The second is that I was the first to be educated without the benefit of phonics, and therefore, when I read names in particular, I very often pronounce them inaccurately. Now, the reason that I said I'm going to go ahead and expose myself to issues of diction in this regard is that I realize that most people are more receptive to the spoken word than they are to the written word. And so the fact that I, like Moshe, have a thick tongue at times and do not articulate well will be that liability is still not worth me saying I won't do it. Just as Moshe went ahead, I'm going ahead, even though I know that I have diction issues. And the third is...
certainly not thick of tongue. I won't let you really go into that. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the third issue is that, well, I'm very comfortable with my understanding of who Yahowah is and what he is offering us and how his plan is being manifest before us. And the understanding part of it I'm very comfortable with, because God's presented it in such a simple manner that when you put the pieces together, it is very easy to understand. The thing that I would never claim, however, is to be a know-it-all. I'm sure there are lots of people who know lots more than I do. But, sometimes knowing can be a liability. Like scholars know a lot about their particular subject, but they understand so little about anything. And so when you knowingly come into something and you say, I've spent a lot of time here, but I'm not going to claim that I'm the most knowledgeable person in any of the subjects that I'm talking about, but I think I've got a pretty good understanding of it, so I'll talk on the big picture in terms of understanding, but I'm always vulnerable on the knowing side. And so those are all flaws, and I'd say there's a fourth, and the fourth is that thank goodness that Yahowah likes working through flawed people, or I'd be out of a job. So I never, ever ask anyone, A, to trust me, or B, to follow my example. All I want to do is
just follow up.
Yeah, so with those caveats, now that you have poked me in the rib, and what was your? We'll have to. Well, Glenn, actually, we're going to have to wait to the break to hear your question, but. I appreciate you poking me in the rib, because I think confession is good in this particular case. It's important for people to know that I am not pretending to be the answer man. I don't want people to trust me. I don't want them to follow me. What I want them to do is to trust and to follow Yahowah. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're talking with Glenn, who is calling in from Philadelphia. And Glenn, I think that we have talked all around your question. I have probably stalled as long as I can stall. Go ahead. What is your question?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to disagree with Scott. He's just wrong. And that's per your instructions at the top of the program. He told me to disagree with him.
Okay.
But anyway, you said people were free to disagree with the producer.
Yeah, I think so far today Scott has only answered one question, and he was right. In fact, it was amazing that on the question, I thought it was a fairly profound.
About that fellow hadn't graduated from high school. Yes. No.
Yeah, and therefore he was not indoctrinated within Eastern liberal universities, and therefore wasn't politically correct, and therefore could still be judgmental. When I came up with that while driving yesterday and said, what was it about this guy? I thought it was a fairly profound insight. And here this morning I asked, and Scott had the answer. I thought that was pretty right on. So I'm going to defend my friend.
Yeah. I just wanted to squirm in his chair because I know he's
okay.
easygoing guy. And besides, Snowden was probably cherry-picked because he had a genius IQ. It's not like he couldn't get a GED. He was probably way ahead of the curve, so they sniped him when he was young. But anyway, okay, I'll put two quick questions, and I'll let you go to town. From what you're saying about 2033, it sounds like the 70th week of Daniel, or time of Jacob's trouble, should begin around 2026, number one. And then about the Sabbath, who's supposed to work the emergency rooms on the Sabbath?
Yeah. Yes, it is the time of Jacob's troubles, which we refer to as the tribulation, based upon the comments in Revelation that are given to us, translated out of Greek, but Yahushua's testimony to Yahukanan. And he mentions in the specifically of those that the Philadelphian ecclesia that he's going to keep out of the time of worldwide tribulation. So that being, if we use Daniel's timeline of the 7 years, and obviously he has got this fascination with 7, since it is obvious that year 6000 is 2033, and that his return is going to occur in that year, which would be the Day of Reconciliations would be his return, and that 5 days later he's going to reestablish Eden-like conditions for a 1,000-year celebration of the Sabbath on Sukkah. If you go back from year 6000 which on our pagan calendar is 2033, you go back 7 years from then, you end up at 2026 is when the tribulation will begin, sometime in the fall of that year. So yes, that is the calculation based upon everything that Yahowah has told us. As it relates to healing on the Shabbat, Yahushua healed on the Shabbat. Yahushua was perfectly Torah observant, and yet he healed on the Shabbat. And by the way, healing was his primary job. And he healed on the Shabbat, and yet was perfectly Torah observant, and he specifically defended healing on the Shabbat. So while I am not one to ever get into an individual case and say, you can or cannot do this or that in accordance with Yahowah's Torah teaching, because I see the Torah as a wholly liberating document that was specifically given to teach us, provide insights and guidance to us, and therefore is a document that is liberating and is as opposed to being constraining. And because I follow the school of thought presented by David, regarding how to observe the Torah, which is to closely examine it, carefully consider it, focus on its 3 overriding themes, which are the prescriptions for living to be cut into the relationship, the terms and conditions of the covenant, and the means that Yahowah uses to make us look perfect and resolve disputes. I am not the right person to ask in terms of fixating on the do's and don'ts. That's not my my focus. It wasn't Dode's focus. It isn't Yahowah's focus. But specifically to your question, that's one of the few ones that I feel fairly comfortable saying that since Yahushua was perfectly Torah observant, since his job was to heal us, and since he healed on the Shabbat, well, I'll tell you what, it's you'd really have to arm wrestle with me for a long time to convey the idea that it's improper for someone to heal on the Shabbat in a hospital.
Right. Or like just as a nurse, I'm thinking people, nursing homes, people need care,
Correct.
And
Correct.
stuff like that. And it's
Correct.
pretty hard. And
Correct.
Yeah. So,
I don't think that there's. Again, I am the last person to focus on what we can and cannot do, because the Torah is a liberating document. So, like Dode, he did a lot of stuff that was inappropriate, and yet he's viewed as being perfect with God. That being the case, I can tell you that it's pretty hard to go wrong by following Yosha's example. Yosha was Torah observant, and he healed on the Shabbat. So, boy, that tells me that it's A-OK. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. I'll tell you that for sure.
Yes, but can I reheat my casserole in the microwave?
You know, there is an instruction about kindling a fire, and so it has been extrapolated as you can't turn on a light, you can't turn on your microwave. And boy, I want to tell you, that's an extrapolation that you've got to be awfully fixated on religion and rules to go to that extreme to say that, yep, that's what I'm going to do. You know, if the purpose of the Shabbat was to observe the Shabbat, which an observation means using your eyes to closely examine and carefully consider Yahowah's instructions regarding the Shabbat, if you didn't turn on that light, it's going to be darn hard to read.
Right. Yeah, it's almost a prescription for neurosis and OCD.
Yeah, exactly. And particularly, when does the Shabbat begin? Does it begin at the brightest light of the day when it would be easy to go outside and read? Or does the Shabbat begin as the sun is setting?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you know, there are reasons why Yahowah says certain things, like the kindling of a fire on the Shabbat. God is saying, I am your light. I am your source of light. On the Shabbat, really reflect on the fact that I am your source of light. I am providing this light for you in terms of enlightening you, of covering you in a garment of light so that you look perfect, so that you transcend the mortal and corporeal imperfections of a material world and become like light and become energy like me. And so when you look at what he says, I would like you to do, and what I'm encouraging you not to do, there is always an insight worth learning, and the kindling of a fire, I view in that context. You know, and like don't eat swine. Well, you know, what is it about swine that would say that God would say that's an instruction that could probably provide a spiritual insight? And what is it about them? Where do pigs live? You know, when we use the term "don't be a pig," that means that you're wallowing in a mess, right? You know, they consume garbage. They wallow in the mud. You know, it's because their respiratory system is such that if they don't wallow in the mud, they die. And their digestive system is so different than the digestive system of grazing animals that not only do they eat rubbish, and therefore God is saying, you know, if you consume rubbish, you're going to become rubbish. But they don't process that which they consume in a manner that is particularly healthful, and therefore they're extraordinarily prone to diseases which can be deadly. And God wants you to know that if you consume that which is deadly, you're going to die. And so, you know, there's just lots of insights that we can learn by looking at his instructions and saying, why did he give us this example? You know, ocean creatures that don't have gills, you know, that you look at them and you're looking at shellfish. Well, what does a shellfish do? How do they nourish themselves? They work as the ocean's cleaner. They consume that which is dead and dying.
They're lawyer fish.
Yeah, they're loyal. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. So I look at everything that God said in that light, that he gave us instruction that if we closely examine and carefully consider it, we'll learn something about him, about ourselves, about what he's offering us, about how we can most productively and enjoyably live our lives. And so even why I could answer, that was one of the few questions that I was comfortable answering as to, can we work in an emergency room healing people on the Shabbat, or in a retirement home taking care of the sick and dying on the Shabbat? Well, that's the one that I'm capable of answering. You know, I look at everything as guidance and instruction.
All right. So
all right.
Can I bartend? Anyway.
Yeah, well, probably not going to spend a lot of time saying, "Can you bartend on the Friday night?" if that is your primary job, I would discourage it. I know it's an opportunity to witness to the heathens, and that is where Yosha also communicated. But I'd probably not do it if that's your primary job.
But the funny thing about a pig is its genetics are sufficiently close to humans that their heart valve can be used as replacements for humans.
Yes. Yeah, because, and it isn't also interesting that we humans have a tendency to roll around in the muck and eat things which are poisonous for us?
Right.
Yep, so
nobody belittles dogs. I'm happy.
One of the reasons, too, that Yahowah discouraged swine is that swine have, when you herd pigs in your midst, because they are genetically so similar to humans, there are diseases that are born in herds of swine that are easily passed on to humans that become epidemic in terms of being deadly, and it's largely because the physiology of the pig is so similar that which is injurious to them is also injurious to us.
Oh, 1918, right? I think it was 1918 with the swine flu.
Correct. Yeah, and still the swine flu is amongst the most deadly killers of humanity. Yep. God's testimony tends to be good advice. All right. Thank you, Glenn. We're going to return now to a little bit of a transition. What I'd like to do now is to turn to a review of what we call the 10 Commandments. It's actually not 10 commandments. It's 10 statements, and it's actually comprised of 3 overriding statements and 7 instructions. But here in a moment, we're going to go through them and consider each of them one at a time. I am Yahowah. This is Shattering Myths. To Shattering Myths. I am your host, Yahowah. We're considering now the statements that Yahowah etched in stone. He told us expressly that there were 2 tablets, and he constantly reminds us there were 2 tablets. And when you realize that there were 10 statements, and he says there are 10 statements, now there's reality, there's a lot more statements if you consider a statement a sentence than 10, but there are 10 overriding statements, of which 3 are introductory kind of summations, and 7 are express instructions regarding our attitude, our approach, our behavior, our thinking. That when God says they were on 2 tablets and they were etched in stone, there are some things that he is communicating to us that most people just pass right on by and just come and call them the 10 Commandments. Now, mind you, there's only one of the 10 statements that was written in the imperative mood, which means there's only one of them that could be considered a commandment. The rest of them were all written in such a way that there is no way to construe them as commands. But beyond all that, why did he say etched in stone, and why did he say 2 of these tablets? And when you think about it and you put them together and you look at the number of letters that you find for and the words which comprise these, that you find out that in Hebrew, the first 3 statements are comprised of 77 words. The 7 instructions are comprised of 77 words. They fit perfectly on 2 tablets. So let's set the 3 instructions apart from the 3 statements apart from the 7 instructions. And we can see the 7 instructions following God's pattern of 6 + 1 = 7. And we can look at them as instructions, and we can look at what was written on the first tablet, 77 words, as an overriding communication from God. In other words, view this first, then view these. View these under the auspices of those 3 statements. Why stone? You know, it's really hard to use an eraser with stone. They don't make a whiteout for stone. You know, with Word, I've got all I have to do is type over something I've already typed, and it's changed. There's something about etching something in stone that makes it unchangeable. You know, when you chisel it in stone, you aren't going back and changing it. God's communication to us is chiseled in stone. There's no eraser. There's no blotting it out. There's no editing it. There's no changing it. There's no adapting it. It ain't like those right now with the U.S. Constitution that say, you know, I think I'm going to disregard that which I've sworn to uphold, and I'm going to adapt and change it to this. That's not God's style. No, he etched his statements and his instructions in stone. Now, there's also something to etch beyond just the fact that they're stone. Etching in Hebrew is related to one of the three things that Dode and Yahowah collectively encourage us to consider relative to observing the Torah. Chok and chukah, the prescriptions for living which cut us into the relationship. You see, chok and chukah, these prescriptions for living that cut us into the relationship, are inscribed. That which is etched in stone, that which is chiseled, so that God's communication to us regarding prescriptions for living is something that he has written. He's inscribed it. He has etched it in stone. God prefers written communication. I know most people prefer verbal communication because it's easier for us to process. But, you know, you can read and process information that is written 7 times faster than you can listen to it and process it when you hear it verbally. That's the way our brains work. From eyes to brain is a much more efficient transmission of information than ear to brain. Now, it's good to listen to God, to reinforce his written word with speech so that we can hear what God's testimony sounds like. But he wrote it so that we would know that it is unchanging, so that it would appeal to all of us throughout the ages, and so that we could process it by observing it with our eyes. We'll return tomorrow. May Yah bless.